Amazing opening talks from Lisa Marie and Claire, and I certainly do feel a little bit the imposter. I'm not a fake news expert as the two of you, but that is to encourage Philip's invitation. I think we all have something to add to the conversation. And one thing well, not being an expert in fake news, have thought a lot about over the last 20 years is digital literacy, and really the political economy of information and how digital literacy fits into it. And it feels like that is a really important third leg of the stool today. And one thing that I want to maybe say some very basic things about misinformation and fake news that we probably all agree on, because I'm not an expert, but then offer a provocation on how we might think about digital literacy in relationship to those things. And so the thing I want to talk about is crap detection at scale. And in particular, we're at this moment where it feels like there are big systems and actors in play here. I mean, you guys both talked about that. And in some ways, well, in many ways, that is very true. In some ways, it's then easy to feel disempowered and like the cause is outside of us, and we kind of just have to look at those big systems or change those big systems, which is true. But there is also something in all of us and in all of the 3.5 billion people on the internet where we actually can fight back against propaganda by thinking critically. And that has to be a part of the conversation. So I want to dig into that a little bit today. And I'm going to start with one of my heroes, Noam Chomsky. And Noam Chomsky is useful here. I actually thought for a while, as a big student of Chomsky in my younger years, that he totally had become irrelevant in the era of sort of open publishing in the internet. So we don't have to worry about the New York Times. We all have blogs. Like, we've actually now gotten to a point where what he wrote about when he first started writing about the political economy of information is very much in play with some different actors. And so, Chomsky obviously had to think about power and concentration of ownership and what that meant for the media ecology we live in. But he did also encourage us to be critical thinkers. And so that is both sides of that have to be in the conversation. Now, of course, when I actually started working in television before there was an internet for most people in the late 80s and early 90s. And that's when Chomsky was writing, although he wrote a lot about newspapers as well. And I think we saw the problem in terms of control over the media, or sort of when we caricatured the media as sort of being spoon-fed propaganda or spoon-fed information. And being critical was then asking questions about what's the motivation of the people who are putting advertisements on, who are controlling newspapers and so on. And digital literacy or media literacy at the time really was very focused on critical thinking as a part of it, which was good, and became mainstream in some countries as a thing that happened in schools. And now we're in a different version of the conversation, where it's not so much about are we being spoon-fed by a central set of actors, but what's real and what's not real, and who is actually, who are the people behind the scenes controlling that interplay of what's real and what's not real. Again, critical thinking needing to be a key part of the story, but looking at some very different sets of things to think critically about. So that's a little bit of the setting. In terms of things we know about fake news and misinformation, and where they may kind of feed into how we think about the digital literacy question or the crap detection question, certainly we know that it's hard for people, even us, to know what's fake and what's real, certainly as they're moving quickly through things on the internet. And Mozilla has actually worked quite a bit on digital literacy stuff over the years, and one of the things we often point to is the discovery by Quartz and others that many people who are first-time smartphone users in different parts of the world don't know that there's a difference between Facebook and the whole internet. And so we kind of started to think, okay, well, let's understand that a little bit. Certainly know there's lots of research that shows people can't tell the difference between advertisements and links to actual content on the internet. And that same set of things in terms of people not being digitally literate shows up in the context of misinformation. And I could pick many, many different stats, this is one that feeds into some of the amplification effects that Claire and Lisa Marie talked about, which is people share stuff very fluidly on the internet. And this is a study that's showing that of the people who share it very often, often it is fake. In fact, 62% find out later that it was inaccurate. And that's not even just sort of studying from the outside. That's people who share something and are asked, did they later find out that the thing wasn't true? So this is, we don't know, we're moving in a very fast-paced environment, and not knowing what is real and what is fake has a tremendous impact on the flow of media and information in our environment, even if you're not somebody who has malintent. So that's one thing we know. It's hard to know that. The other, and we didn't talk about this that much in the first two talks, it's really important to kind of focus on, is what we share is the modern newspaper, the modern television channel. So in the US, 62% of people get their news from social. And I think, I can't remember if it was Claire or Lisa Marie talked about, people often don't click through. I think it's like around half or somewhere in the half zone. So Facebook is the newspaper. And in fact, there's a great article, I think it just came out this week, or at least in the last couple of weeks, in The Atlantic, called What Facebook Did to American Democracy. And it is very worth a read, in that it goes through in a lot of detail some of the things that have happened with Facebook that kind of fit into this whole story, which include things that really don't have anything to do with politics or misinformation at all, but had an impact. And so Facebook very clearly set itself up to take over and put itself between the publishers and the audience as a way to maximize revenue. And it was good for the publishers in the sense that they got more screen time, more engagement with people through Facebook, but also made them incredibly coupled to Facebook and reinforced that it's not just users who've gone to social in this way. It has actually been a very intentional strategy on the part of the social companies. And of course, the goal of the social companies is not, propaganda. The goal of the social companies is to sell advertising. And so, what their metric, as everyone I'm sure in this room knows, really is just user engagement. They just want to keep people on those sites. But then if what happens is those become vectors for propaganda, that is where everyone is looking. So I think that's the second point, is that this is the news industry, the social platforms, which leads into the third platform, which you guys talked about a lot, and especially the Oxford stuff I've been watching is great on this, is that fake news, misinformation is becoming a political weapon. And in this room, that is not a shocking thing to say, but it is important in terms of the stakes of what is happening here. It is affecting the real world. It's not an abstract conversation about the internet should be open or not open, or the news should be, have more competition and less consolidation. There are very real world consequences. And so it's kind of trite in this room to cite Pizzagate, but it's a good one in the sense that it really is something that got weaponized. And it's really not clear whether Welch, probably people know more about this than me, would or wouldn't have gone in with a gun had he not had this fake news story, and probably wouldn't have seated him to do this thing in this place. But he did till the end sort of say, I still believe in those conspiracy theories. And so the power of that stuff circulating for people to take crazy action is a real world thing. But also, as we know and have seen, it has massive real world consequences in terms of things like elections and whether our democracies work. And I was going to say, like it or not, I think we like it. I certainly like it. Having a good media is a core part of having meaningful and real democracies. And that is something that really is shaking in new ways. It's always shaken over time. We've always had propaganda. But it's shaking in new ways that we need to understand and attack. So, I think we know those things, that fake news is having an impact on the real world around us, that some of these basic challenges around people knowing what's fake, the vectors of fake news and misinformation of social being the newspaper, we know those things. Those are fairly easy things to assert. So Oh, and then I was just going to make the point that you just made for 15 minutes, which is that it's not just fake news, it's propaganda. So I won't spend any time on that. So I guess, the question is, what do we think about that in particular in relationship to digital literacy? But what do we think about that more broadly, bringing Chomsky back into the picture? And one thing I think we absolutely need to look at is media ownership and then how it ties to the media sphere we have. And so, taking Chomsky from the 80s into 2017, the amount of control that a few social platforms have, the amount of influence that their desire to build up engagement metrics and sell advertising have on what information people get, we actually have to understand the political economy of that and think about what we want to do about it. And I don't think there actually is enough of the political economy conversation happening around this. But that and many of the other conversations really are about the man. And what about us and what do we do? Because it is not just the big system that needs to change. And that's where kind of go to one of my other heroes, Howard Rheingold, who's been running a crap detection course online since 2010. And Howard actually inspired us to put bullshit detection or crap detection or critical thinking into Mozilla's web literacy framework. And he's always sort of been a proponent, and as many people are, there's people in the room here, been saying for a long time, critical thinking in a complex, fast-moving environment like the internet is something we actually need to rethink anew. And so there's different kinds of things in terms of what we're exposed to, whether that is data, whether that's the speed of memes moving through the internet. We actually need to develop a new set of critical thinking skills. And we've actually been involved in that. If you come to MozFest over the weekend, you'll meet lots of people who've been doing that in building a web literacy framework that adds critical thinking, adds production, so I understand the materiality of the digital world into how we do that. And we worked with teachers and librarians around the world and scientists and all sorts of folks on really engaging in a new approach to digital literacy. And while we'll continue to do that, I think we've had some really good breakthroughs in the kinds of things that people need to learn. I think the scale at which we're able to do it with teachers and librarians is just not at all at the scale that is needed in terms of how much the world has changed. So this is literacy changing from 1800 to 2014 in terms of written literacy. When we think about digital literacy, we don't think about needing to make a change this dramatic, which is literally flipping from 20% of the planet being literate to 80% of the planet being literate, and we still have another 20% to go, and that is important work. But in that, and why that happened was because we needed, as humanity, a different set of skills to function in the industrial world and to function in democracies. So that was actually a very specific need, moving from agriculture to the industrial world. There are things we are not, as a society, literate in terms of how the digital world works, much bigger than just fake news, but being able to crap detect and understand what is going on in the digital planet that we are building is a shift, I would say, on the order of this. It is not just about training engineers, it's not just about coding in the classroom. We, on a massive scale, need to figure out how every person understands the digital world, can make critical decisions, and actually help shape it. So, teachers and librarians are a part of that solution, but it is not going to be enough. So, the question for this group, which is going to have a digital literacy section, is how do we, and that is including you, tackle this problem? And we've started to see, some people come at it. People in this room may know about this sort of Facebook information button, which I guess, I just heard this morning, has backfired in that by flagging as something as possibly a questionable source of information, it's had more people click through on questionable information. But it speaks to, I think, part of what we need to do above and beyond just integrating digital literacy into our classrooms and our libraries, which is in situ, in the actual digital environments we exist in, start to both make it easier to see what's real and what's not, or at least to kind of let us make those decisions because we have data in front of us, and also educate us through the process of existing in that digital environment about the kinds of skills, or encourage the development of the kind of skills that we would need to think more critically and assess things. And so, this is an early example where throwing UX people and product managers at the problem is taken as the approach. And I would say, like, that kind of thing is a critical thing for this group, for the platforms, for others to be thinking about. How do we build crowd detection and digital literacy into our products and into how we use the internet every day? And we have some examples where it works. So this is sort of a malware warning, and then there's a bunch of infrastructure behind it which knows what sites have been reported as malware. And there's lots of debates have happened around misinformation and fake news to this degree. Do we want to actually know what's fake and what's not? And I'm not suggesting we do that. But this is at least a good example. The malware and phishing worlds are good examples where we see integrating into product the idea of warning people and helping them make a decision. That's really my provocation and invitation to us. How do we do that to tackle some of this problem so we can be the critical thinkers, but the technology which is there to aid us aids us in that process? And I don't know the answer, but I do have one thought in terms of a place that has worked successfully, and that maybe it's just it's a little bit of the thing to get your thinking as you think about this today. It has worked very successfully in urinals. And so, this is something that people have probably seen. You see it in women's washrooms as well, is that the anti-drunk driving movement has, started over the last decade or so to put advertising reminding you not to drive drunk in places like bathrooms and bars. And, there certainly are these criminal-oriented ones. There's, this is very in situ. And so, kind of would put it right where you would be thinking about this. And then I like this one in particular. I want to leave you with it because it is really viscerally simulating what it is that you want to remind somebody of. And so, this is obviously not literally what we want to do with fake news, but how do we actually get thinking about what is actually going on into the digital environments we live in, so that people can make better decisions and become more critical thinkers every day as they use the internet. So that is my encouragement and my question for the digital literacy group as you break out today. Thanks very much.